Here is the funniest and most terrifying theory in all of Warhammer 40,000. And the horrifying part is how completely the established rules support it. A video called "Emperor of Mankind is Dead. Truth of the Golden Throne Revealed" has nearly 500,000 views on YouTube. By any reasonable measure, it's one of the more successful pieces of Warhammer lore content the platform has produced. But the most popular thing about it isn't the video itself. It's a comment sitting underneath it, quietly accumulating agreement from everyone who reads it and can't immediately argue back. He actually can't die because the Orks think he's alive. 1,900 upvotes, the highest liked comment in the entire comment section, more than any other response the channel has received. The reason it keeps collecting them is that it occupies a specific frequency where a joke and a genuine argument exist in the same sentence, and the longer you sit with it, the more the joke recedes and the argument remains. This is that argument. Built on established canon, with the limits flagged clearly, using the rules the setting has already given us. The Imperium of Man believes the God Emperor is sustained by the Golden Throne, a vast machine of probable Xenos origin, jury-rigged into life support after the Horus heresy, fed thousands of psychic souls every single day to keep functioning. The faithful believe their prayers sustain him. The Adeptus Custodes believe their vigil sustains him. The Adeptus Mechanicus believes the machine sustains him, while also knowing quietly that the machine is degrading and none of their priests know how to fix it. Then there is another belief system, operating galaxy-wide, older than the Imperium, dumber than any prayer, and possibly more powerful than all of it combined. It belongs to the one species the Imperium can't kill, negotiate with, contain, or make stop thinking about it. Orks shape reality with what they believe. This isn't fan embellishment, it's canon. And across a galaxy crawling with untold trillions of orks, the collective certainty that the Emperor of Mankind is real, alive, and the ultimate fight worth having may be doing something nobody in the Imperium has ever thought to measure. To understand why this holds up mechanically, you first need to understand what the WOG actually is. Not the battle cry, not the military event, but the field. Every ork generates a low-level psychic resonance. Individually, it does almost nothing measurable. But orks don't remain individual for long, and when they gather, those signals compound into something else entirely. The Warhammer 40,000 fandom wiki on the WOG describes what emerges as the Gestalt psychic field the greenskins generate that affects the orc psyche. A collective, warp-adjacent phenomenon that grows stronger as more orcs congregate in a given area, and as those orcs experience the satisfaction that comes from fighting. It isn't just vocabulary, it's a measurable psychic force in the setting, and its effects on physical reality are documented across multiple codex editions. The Adeptus Mechanicus encountered this directly during the War of the Beast in the 32nd millennium, the largest recorded orc invasion in Imperial history, a campaign that struck directly at Terra and nearly ended the Imperium before anyone understood what they were dealing with. As the Beast's orc forces grew in number and confidence, Mechanicus observers began noting something specific. Certain orc weapons only seemed to function properly when wielded by orcs. Human soldiers picked up orc guns and got nothing. Orc vehicles stripped of their crews behaved differently from what their engineering alone should have produced.
The 3rd edition Codex, Orks, puts the emerging conclusion this way, framed as an in-universe theory. I theorize that many orc inventions work because the orcs themselves think they should work. The strong telekinetic abilities of the orc subconscious somehow ensure they function as desired. The framing matters. This is a character theorizing within the fiction, not an omniscient narrator confirming from outside it. The Codex is presenting this as a contested position, which the community has argued over for decades, and correctly, because the effect is real, but the mechanism is more precise than "orcs believe it, so it happens." The 4th edition codex, Orks, provides the hard example, the one that stopped being a theory and became a tabletop rule. Page 93. Orks believe that a vehicle that has been painted red can outstrip a similar vehicle that isn't. As odd as it may seem, they are quite right. That is the out-of-universe narrator speaking, the book itself describing the physics of the setting. Red orc vehicles genuinely go faster, not because of aerodynamics, not because mech boys selectively paint their fastest vehicles red, but because the codex mechanized it explicitly. Orc vehicles with red paint jobs received +1 to their movement in the movement phase, a rule representing belief physics encoded directly into the game. The 5th edition codex, Orks, went further, describing orcs as a race of latent psychers, whose combined presence creates an energy field that affects reality. And the scale matters enormously. A single orc is ambient noise. A mob of 50 starts to do something. A wah of millions generates effects measurable across a star system. In the Beast Arises novel series, an orc invasion of sufficient size cut off entire Imperial worlds from the warp entirely. The wah field overwhelming warp-based communications, leaving Imperial forces in isolated blackout conditions across the affected systems. That isn't a local effect. That is planetary-scale disruption of warp phenomena. These effects aren't limited to technology. Orc weird boys absorb the ambient wah energy generated by surrounding orcs, building up psychic charge from the collective output of nearby mobs until they either release it as violent psychic blasts or collapse under its weight. When the surrounding orcs are killed or dispersed, weird boys become almost inert. Their power is entirely dependent on the field their brethren generate. Sever the source, and the effect vanishes. In every documented case, the field operates passively. Ordinary orcs don't consciously direct it. They don't decide to make their red paint go faster. The belief is ambient, cultural, inherited. The accumulated assumptions of a species running beneath conscious thought, feeding a field that adjusts probability to match those assumptions. Red is faster. Blue is lucky. Purple makes you harder to spot. These aren't orc decisions. They are orc facts. And the universe has apparently agreed to operate accordingly in the presence of the beings who hold them. The field isn't omnipotence. What the evidence actually demonstrates is something more precise. The wah tips probability toward orc expectations. It makes things that are almost possible reliably happen. A ramshackle plane that should come apart at speed stays together. A gun with too many moving parts fires every time instead of jamming. A vehicle painted red edges out a blue one in ways that have no aerodynamic explanation. The field presses on the scene between barely possible and reliably true, and pushes things to the favorable side of that line. Remove the orcs, remove the field, and the effect dissipates. This is the load-bearing rule for everything that follows. It's established canon. The bridge between that rule and the Emperor has been sitting in the lore the entire time. Gork and Mork,
Two enormous warp entities,
the gods of the orc race. Gork, who is brutal and cunning, Mork, who is cunning and brutal, exist in the immaterium as genuine, massive presences sustained entirely by orc collective belief. They aren't gods in the sense of creators or architects of existence. They are gods in the same sense that the chaos gods are gods, entities whose power and continued existence is directly proportional to how much psychic energy their believers pour into the warp. The chaos gods operate on exactly this mechanism. Corn grows stronger when mortals rage and kill. Slanesh feeds on sensation and excess. Tzeentch feeds on ambition and the hope for change. Nurgle feeds on despair and the acceptance of inevitable decay. This isn't background flavor, it's the central operational mechanic of the warp and its inhabitants. Belief is fuel. Belief sustained across enough minds at sufficient intensity becomes power sufficient to shape an entity capable of reaching back across the veil into real space. Ork collective warlike nature pours energy into the warp, and Gork and Mork exist because of it. They are shaped by it, sustained by it, growing larger as orcs fight harder, win more, and believe more completely in the gods who embody their nature. Ghazghul Mag Uruk Thraka, the most influential orc alive in the 41st millennium, prophet of these gods, instigator of the Second and Third Wars for Armageddon, a being around whom billions of greenskins have gathered, carries visions that Gork and Mork personally delivered, of a wog so vast that the gods themselves would tear out of the warp to participate. That vision describes a feedback loop, orcs fighting at sufficient intensity to drag their own warp entities into real space. The canonically established fact is therefore this: orc collective belief, at the scale of trillions of beings, can create and sustain entities in the warp. Entities with agency, power, and the capacity to reach back into the material world. Now, the Emperor has a psychic presence in the warp. His body is on the throne, ruined and maintained by machinery, but his consciousness is active in the immaterium, battling demons, holding back 10,000 years of continuous assault, projecting the Astronomicon outward across thousands of light years as the navigational beacon that keeps imperial ships from being swallowed forever in the void. He exists in the same metaphysical space as Gork and Mork. He is precisely the kind of entity that warp-affecting belief would interact with. Gork and Mork are the proof of mechanism. The Emperor is the application of that mechanism to a different target. The only question is whether the orc belief in the Emperor, in his existence, his realness, his status as the ultimate fight, resembles the kind of belief that sustains the green gods closely enough to produce a comparable effect. To answer that, you need to understand how orcs actually see the Emperor, and that requires understanding how orcs see everything. Orc society is organized entirely around the principle that the strongest being wins, and winning determines who is right. They fight amongst themselves to establish dominance. They fight other species because other species are in the galaxy and therefore available to fight. They fight harder when they find an opponent who gives them a proper contest. Fighting is the end for orcs, not a means to territory, food, or ideology. They wage war because they were built to wage it, and because the experience of combat is, for an orc, approximately what a deeply satisfying meal is for a human. This creates a specific relationship to enemies. The worse an opponent makes things for an orc, the more that opponent is believed in. The belief isn't philosophical. Orcs don't have philosophy. But in the way that matters to the Wog field, the enemy who is real, dangerous, and worth dying to fight becomes more real through that belief.
An enemy orcs don't respect is an obstacle to clear. An enemy they respect is a destination to return to. The canonical illustration of this is the relationship between Ghazghul Mag Uruk Thraka and Imperial Commissar Yarrick. Across the Second and Third Wars for Armageddon, Yarrick has cost Ghazghul campaigns. Yarrick has handed him defeats that a lesser orc might have found discouraging. Ghazghul's documented response isn't to want Yarrick dead. He has had Yarrick captured. He has had him at his mercy, genuinely available to execute, and chosen not to, multiple times. Not from mercy, from something that functions in orc terms as the highest possible compliment.
Yarick is the best enemy Ghazghul has, and killing him would end the fight, and the fight is the entire point. The fandom wiki on Ghazghul states his own declaration plainly. I'm Warlord Ghazghul Mag Uruk Thraka, and I speak with the word of the gods. I'm the prophet of Dawa, and whole worlds burn in my boot prints. He says this as an explanation of purpose, not of conquest. He isn't accumulating resources or territory. He is accumulating the fight. Now, how do orcs actually see the Emperor? Lore sources are careful here, and so should this argument be. A significant percentage of orcs, especially feral populations living in isolation from sustained campaigns against the Imperium, have no particular awareness of the Emperor as an individual. He isn't a being they have encountered, not a topic any war boss has addressed, not something that has presented itself as an obstacle or a worthy opponent. To those orcs, he is nothing specific. But orcs who have been part of sustained campaigns against the Imperium, and this means hundreds of billions of orcs, given that the Imperium is the largest opponent the Green Tide presses against, have a perspective. That perspective positions the Emperor as humans' equivalent of Gork and Mork, the war god of the Umis, the hardest and most unkillable human boss. A tough git, the toughest git. The one who has been running this war against them for 10,000 years, apparently sitting at the center of everything in a golden chair on the original human world, never having come out to fight. An orc war boss in M32, styling himself simply the Beast, launched the largest orc invasion in Imperial history directly at Terra. Not at a resource-rich world, not at a strategic choke point in the supply chain, at the seat of the Imperium, the place the Emperor lives. The Beast nearly succeeded. The Imperium survived at catastrophic cost to the Adeptus Astartes, resorting to measures that left multiple chapters severely depleted. The attack wasn't a military calculation in any conventional sense. It was the natural terminus of what orcs become when they grow large enough. They aim at the biggest fight, in the direction of the most important enemy. Ghazghul's visions from Gork and Mork point the same direction. A future Wa that will drown the galaxy, with a destination fixed not for strategic value but because Terra is where the hardest fight lives, where the biggest, most unkillable git sits in his chair. The Emperor has never been beaten by an orc. He has been on that chair for 10,000 years, technically present, technically unreachable. From the orc perspective, that means one thing: he is waiting. An enemy who hasn't been beaten, who hasn't shown up to lose, who is presumably still out there at the center of everything, that is an enemy who is alive. And an enemy who is alive and waiting and refusing to be finished is precisely the kind of enemy an orc's ambient certainty reaches out toward. At this point, the argument assembles from its components. The Wa field exists. It scales with orc numbers. It's warp adjacent. At sufficient scale, it sustains entities in the warp. Gork and Mork are the proof.
The Emperor's psychic consciousness is present in the warp, actively engaged with its currents. Orcs believe, in the ambient and cultural way the field operates on, that the Emperor is real, alive, and the ultimate fight still waiting for them. The theory says this belief is functioning as a third component in the Emperor's survival equation, alongside the throne and the sacrifice. An accidental life support system, built across 10 millennia by the species trying hardest to destroy everything the Emperor built, requiring no knowledge of its own existence to operate. Now, the limits need to be stated, because the limits are real, and this argument only holds together if it's honest about them. What canonical sources confirm: the Wog field exists, is warp adjacent,
scales with Ork population, and can sustain warp entities. Ork belief has documented mechanical effects on local probability. The Emperor's psychic presence is active in the warp. What no canonical source confirms, that the WOG field has ever directly sustained a specific non-Ork entity. All documented examples of Ork belief affecting things are local and Ork proximate. Their technology, their gods, their own bodies growing larger through years of combat experience. The galaxy-wide scope is the weakest point in the argument. Documented WOG effects are local, occurring in the vicinity of concentrated Ork populations, not as some omnipresent galaxy-spanning broadcast. Whether the dispersed, ambient certainty of trillions of Orks spread across 10,000 worlds adds up to something coherent at cosmological scale is genuinely unknown. No in-universe scholar has addressed this, because no in-universe scholar has thought to ask the question. The Imperium does not understand the WOG field well enough to model it. The Adeptus Mechanicus has partial theories from M32. The Ordo Xenos has fragmentary operational data. Nobody has run the calculation that would tell you whether dispersed Ork belief reaches a specific warp-present entity across galactic distance. That gap isn't the theory's failure. That gap is precisely what makes it a theory. The counter-argument, that the WOG field is too local, too Ork-specific to reach across the galaxy and affect a named psychic entity, runs directly into Gork and Mork. Those are named psychic entities. They exist in the warp. They are sustained by Ork collective belief operating across the same galactic scale as the Ork population itself. Arguing the mechanism categorically can't apply to any other warp-present entity requires explaining why Gork and Mork are special exceptions rather than the demonstration of the rule. The argument can't be proven. The canon does not state it. But it follows from what the canon has established, and the precedent it requires is already sitting in the lore. The Golden Throne's true condition sharpens the stakes considerably. The throne was never designed as life support. Its original function was to be a psychic amplifier, built around a core device of unknown, probably Xenos, origin discovered in caves beneath what would become the Imperial Palace. The Emperor intended to use it to bore a path into the webway and give humanity safe passage through that extra-dimensional network. Magnus the Red destroyed that project when his psychic message, sent to warn his father of Horus's treachery, tore through the webway barrier and allowed demons to flood into the breach. The Emperor abandoned the Great Crusade, returned to Terra, sat on the throne to hold that breach closed, and hasn't been able to leave since. When the Emperor briefly vacated the throne during the final confrontation with Horus aboard the Vengeful Spirit, Malcador the Sigillite held it in his place. Malcador was one of the most powerful human psychers in history, second only to the Emperor himself in some accounts. The throne consumed him in days.
When the Emperor returned, shattered almost beyond recovery, Malcador was ash. The machine's demands had exceeded even his capacity. The Emperor has held the throne for 10,000 years. His physical condition isn't ambiguous. The Lexicanum states it directly. He has sat immobile within the golden throne of Terra for 10,000 years. Although once a living man, his shattered body can no longer support life. The fandom wiki adds that his shattered, decaying body can no longer support life, and it's kept intact only by the cybernetic mechanisms of the Golden Throne. His body does not live. It's maintained against its own collapse by machinery. His psychic condition is different. Multiple sources, including the Dark Imperium novel, confirm he is psychically active.
His consciousness is in the warp, doing continuous work, defending against demonic assault, projecting the Astronomicon, maintaining the webway seal beneath the imperial palace. The Astronomicon, the beacon that makes interstellar navigation possible across 1,000,000 worlds, requires his ongoing presence to function. There are records of what happens when it briefly falters. The consequences are catastrophic enough that nobody who studies 40K lore needs them explained. So, body effectively dead, mind actively present in the warp. The machine maintains the body. The machine channels psychic output into the Astronomicon apparatus, but the machine is a conduit and a container. It isn't the source of his ongoing psychic agency, and it was never engineered to be. The throne is degrading. The Adeptus Mechanicus knows this. They have known it for some time and have no idea how to reverse it. Thousands of psychic souls are fed to it daily. The precise figure is disputed across sources, and the degradation rate isn't keeping pace with the rate of sacrifice. A failing machine maintained at maximum input, buying time at enormous cost, with no repair plan and no end in sight. Recent lore has made this visible in new ways. The short story, The Carrion Lord of the Imperium, published in the Horus Heresy anthology, Era of Ruin, depicts custodian Diocletian approaching the Golden Throne and encountering the Emperor's physical state in terms that generated significant fan reaction. Blood bags, wires described as resembling intestines, mist, custodes wearing black markings that read as funerary. IGN ran a piece about the fan response with a headline referencing tantalizing insight into the Carrion Emperor and the Golden Throne's true nature. Inquisitor Romanov's follow-up video unpacking that story, Era of Ruin, Insane New Lore, Emperor Fake and Custodes Hate Primarchs, pulled 336,000 views. His primary video on the Emperor's status reached nearly 500,000, and the most liked comment on that primary video, 1,900 upvotes, the highest the channel has recorded, says what it says. The official canonical position holds that the Emperor isn't dead. His body is mortally wounded and sustained by machinery, but his will persists. What will persists means in practice, across 10,000 years of physical decay and continuous warp-level combat, is deliberately left ambiguous. His body can't support life. His psychic presence continues. The throne sustains the body. The sacrifice fuels the throne. But what keeps the warp presence coherent? What prevents a consciousness at war with daemons for 10 millennia from simply dissipating into the immaterium? The Imperium has a machine answer and a faith answer, and both of those answers are under visible strain. The theory offers a third answer, unofficial, unconfirmed, built from the same rules the lore already has. The scale of current Ork belief makes the argument more uncomfortable, not less.
The fandom article on the WOG describes the present era as one where, over the last century or so, the Orks have become even more aggressive and warlike than ever before, and the numbers of WOGs being recorded in all 5 segmentums is increasing. The Great Rift, the Cicatrix Maledictum, the galaxy-wide wound opened by the events of the 8th edition timeline, has made warp travel more turbulent, and warp turbulence apparently makes Orks more belligerent. Their population is at or near a historic high. The ambient WAV field they generate collectively is, by the logic of how it scales, producing more output now than at almost any previous point in the setting's history. Meanwhile, the throne is at or near its lowest operational state. The machine that officially does the sustaining is failing faster than any public imperial institution acknowledges.
The gap between what the official life support system can provide and what the Emperor requires to persist is widening. If the theory is correct, the Ork contribution matters most right now, and right now is when the Ork contribution is largest. Across all 5 segmentums, trillions of Orks are alive and fighting, with the largest concentrations pressing against the Imperium's borders. The most powerful Ork alive is gathering every warlord he can find, driven by divine visions of an ultimate war, with his destination fixed and his direction clear. All of that collective warlike energy is pointed, in the broadest sense, at the same place. Terra, the hardest fight. The Emperor. The ambient Ork certainty that this fight exists, that the Emperor is there, real, unkillable, worth this accumulated momentum, isn't weakening. The Wa is building towards something Ghazghul believes will be big enough for the gods themselves to emerge and watch. If the field is doing anything to the Emperor's warp presence, it's doing more of it now than at any point since the heresy ended. The payoff to this theory, the part that turns it from clever to genuinely unsettling, is what happens if the belief were ever to stop. When Ork belief withdraws from something, the effect dissipates. Ork weapons that function in Ork hands become unreliable or inert when taken by non-Orks. Weird boys become almost powerless when their surrounding mob is killed or scattered. A Wa loses momentum when its war boss dies, and the gathered Orks fragment into infighting. The organizing force is gone, and the field with it. The belief requires the believers to be present, gathered, and invested. So, could Orks ever collectively decide the Emperor was dead and not worth the fight? Their biology and philosophy make this nearly impossible, and the reason is specific. To an Ork, the best enemies don't die. They wait. The Yarrick and Ghazghul relationship illustrates this precisely. Ghazghul has had Yarrick at his mercy on multiple occasions and chosen not to kill him, because killing Yarrick would end the fight, and the fight is the point. A worthy enemy isn't something to be destroyed, it's something to return to, again and again, kept alive by the logic of the contest itself. Yarrick is worth more to Ghazghul breathing than dead, because a living Yarrick is a fight that still exists. The Emperor has never been defeated in combat by an Ork. He has been on the throne for 10,000 years. He hasn't come out to fight. He hasn't been killed. He hasn't signaled in any way that the contest is cancelled. From the Ork perspective, that has one interpretation. He is waiting. An enemy who hasn't been beaten isn't dead. He's waiting. And an enemy who has been running this war against you for 10 millennia, through all the green tide, through all the stars, who hasn't yet shown up to lose, that enemy is the ultimate opponent. Real, present, unreachable for now, but still there. Orks will never collectively decide the Emperor is dead.
Their cosmology doesn't have a framework for the great enemy quietly expired and the fight was cancelled. The fight doesn't get cancelled. The enemy waits. The best enemy always waits. And the certainty that he is waiting, ambient, galaxy-wide, carried by trillions of green bodies simply by being what they are and wanting what they want, is the thing the theory identifies as a passive, psychic life support system more ancient and more vast than anything the Mechanicus has ever built or understood. The Imperium sacrifices thousands of souls a day to a failing golden machine and tells itself that's enough. The faithful whisper a trillion prayers into the dark and call it devotion. The Adeptus Mechanicus monitor the throne's degradation with quiet horror and share almost none of it with anyone in a position to panic visibly. Meanwhile,
On 10,000 worlds, the green tide is absolutely certain the Emperor is still alive. Certain with the uncomplicated, total, unstoppable certainty of a species that has been trying to reach him for 10,000 years and shows no signs of stopping. They don't pray to him, they want to crump him, and their certainty that he's out there to be crumped might be the strongest thing holding him in the world. The Emperor of mankind is kept alive by his greatest enemy's refusal to believe he could ever die. Wa is, apparently, a life support system, and nobody told the Imperium. Subscribe for more stories like this one.